Welcome to Rider Forge. This is Dr. Will speaking. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell for new video notifications. Due to a lot of demand, I've decided to reboot my series covering motorcycles for beginners, and I'm not going to assume you have any previous experience. I'm going to show you how anyone, and I mean anyone, can understand how motorcycles work, become a proficient rider, and even perform some basic maintenance jobs. I don't care if you're a 90-pound, 4-foot-tall woman, you can do it. In this video, we're going to quickly review the basic parts of a motorcycle from a very high level. This is going to be a first look, as if you've never even touched a bike before. Stick around. Welcome back, riders. In this video, we're going to cover a quick, high-level overview of a street motorcycle. This video assumes you don't have any previous knowledge or experience. I'm going to briefly identify the major parts of a motorcycle. This series in general is going to break down a complex subject into bite-sized chunks that anyone can understand. If you like what I'm doing, I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. Now, without further delay, let's get into it. So let's jump over to the left side of the bike. And what I'm going to do is grab a pen so that you can see what I'm pointing at. Let's start with the simplest thing here. How about the seat? What do we need to know about the seat? Well, most of the seats that come with motorcycles are pretty darn uncomfortable, believe it or not. You'd think that that would be more of a selling point, but it isn't. You can't really tell if it's uncomfortable by sitting on it for a few minutes. It really kind of takes maybe half an hour to an hour before you really start to understand whether your seat sucks or not. That's unfortunate, but the fact of life is anyone who rides a lot probably spent some money to upgrade the seat. You should budget that in. Seats can be anywhere from $500 and up. A really cheap brand new seat might be $300, and that's on the real low end if you're lucky. Some seats are much more expensive. If you have a Harley or some sort of crazy bike like that, you can expect to pay a lot more. Now this portion back here, this whole thing right here includes the fender, and this is the rear turn signal, and this is the rear brake light. Nothing much to know about that, although something interesting to know about motorcycles is that they have two different brakes, a front brake and a rear brake. Both of them can operate the tail light. Okay, so when you see that brake light go on and off, it can go on using the front brakes only or the rear brakes. Some bikes even have linked brakes. That is, when you hit the front brake, it'll actually apply some rear brake too, or vice versa. So that's an interesting fact to know, I suppose. Let me just reset this here. The gas tank. Knowing about gas tank is there's usually down here either a petcock, and what that is it's just a kind of valve in which fuel just passively flows out of it, or you could have a fuel pump if you have a more powerful or a more modern bike. This is the fuel cap right here. These come off with a key, and they either just sort of pop off by turning them a little bit to the side, or sometimes they full-on screw off. The screwing off is a little less common. I think that's more popular in more dirt-style bikes and maybe some retro-style bikes. Typically, you're going to push down and turn to the side with the key to get it out. It can be a little tricky. Just be careful not to bend your key. That's actually, believe it or not, really easy to do when you're struggling if you don't really know how to open a gas cap. So the fuel that you're going to put in here, just follow the manufacturer's recommendation. There's a lot of debate about this, whether you need certain types of fuel or if you need to get rid of ethanol or something like that. I wouldn't really worry about it. All I need you to do is just follow the manufacturer's recommendation. Okay, save the debates for the the forum warriors out there. Right behind here we have what is usually some storage or an air box, an air filter, or you can often find an owner's manual, things of that nature are tucked behind here. There might be some space to put your registration and so on and so forth. Sometimes they stick that stuff underneath the seat too. Around here there might be a small little cubby area. All right. Other than that, air filter. In here you either have the carburetor or fuel injection system. They both look actually superficially kind of the same. They have some sort of throttle bodies in here. Surprisingly, it actually looks pretty similar in both systems, but you either have a carburetor or you have a fuel injection system. This is the entire engine and transmission. I'm highlighting that now. This is the top of the engine, or the top end. This is the bottom end of the engine, the bottom end. The bottom end includes the transmission and the crankshaft. Okay. You don't have to worry about the technical aspects of the engine at this point. Just know that they exist. Now over here, this is where the engine connects to the rear wheel. You can see this sprocket back here. All right, now they connect to each other, in this case, using a chain. Some bikes use belts. Some bikes use a steel shaft that goes all the way from the front to the back. Okay, this one in particular uses a chain. And in the front, this is where the engine's going to turn, and it turns the rear wheel by being connected via this chain. I'm drawing the hell out of this right now. Okay, that's how that works. That's how your rear wheel spins. You have a chain guard right there that just keeps stuff from flying off the chain, protects the chain a little bit, protects you a little bit, keeps your feet and your fingers out of there. This is the rear suspension. Some bikes would have a shock on both sides. In case this retro style bike, it has two. Some bikes will have one just sitting in the middle. Sometimes these shocks can be tucked inside here and kind of hidden away. Sometimes they're on the outside like this. Newer bikes tend to have the shocks more hidden. Older bikes tend to like to show them off. This bike is sort of a retro style. Of course, you're familiar with what a wheel is and a tire. The only thing you really need to worry about for tires is use something that's appropriate for your bike, stick with a brand name, check out the reviews, all that kind of thing. But there's a date stamp that you're going to see on the side of the tires. If you're ever buying a used bike, biggest thing to worry about is that date stamp on those tires. Don't run tires that are more than like 4 or 5 years old max. I don't care how new they look. They get hard over time and they do not grip well, especially in the wet. So just replace them. If you see a bike, it's got old tires on it, there's a code here, and you have to decipher the code. It's got like the months and the year it was produced and then the month number and all that. You kind of have to decipher the code, but you want to look for that. It's very important. Make sure you do not run old tires. Not worth the money. Just, it's a wash. If it's a 5-year-old bike with 100 miles on it, replace the tires, okay? And I'm sorry, you can try and argue the price with the seller on that one. I know they're not going to want to budge on it, but seriously, don't be an idiot. Replace the tires. Okay, moving on. Right here we have the headers. This is where the exhaust exits the engine. These are really, really hot. They get boiling hot within 2 seconds of starting the bike. Don't touch it. You're going to get a tattoo from that. This right here is the muffler, also equally hot, although it will take a few minutes. If you have an aftermarket muffler, something made out of aluminum carbon fiber, these can actually stay surprisingly cold enough to even touch. Although I'm not recommending it, so please don't say that you did it, but just know that if you had a carbon fiber or an aluminum aftermarket one, the OEM ones, the ones that come with the bike, they tend to run really, really hot because they're heavy, 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 full of lots of different emissions things, and they're very, very dense, full of steel. Okay, and various other filtering elements. Not really going to worry about that right now, though. All right, so this sort of structure running all down you can see this. This is called the frame. You can see it running here. Can you see that outline here? If you look closely, you can see that. All right, and it does run through here as well. I'm kind of outlining it, and it's going to run all the way up here. It actually goes underneath the gas tank, too. It's actually going to run underneath the seat. All right, and it actually comes up here. Now, this is where everything attaches, and this is the structural frame of the bike. Everything attaches to it. It gives it its rigidity. It gives it its many of its handling characteristics. Okay, just be aware that it's there. You're probably not really paying much attention to that when you're first looking at motorcycles, but they're there. If a motorcycle ever has a damaged frame, it's pretty much a wash. You kind of get rid of them. You can't really salvage them. It's like a crash car with frame damage. Only in a bike it's worth. Never really risk a damaged frame. Now this is the swing arm. This is basically another arm that pivots here, and I think that's probably where it attaches right there. And this arm just goes up and down with the suspension moving. And this is what allows that rear wheel to kind of pivot and go up and down. Allows it to travel. All right, down here we have a center stand, and I know it's really dark here, but I believe there's another kickstand right here too. So there's 2 different kickstands on this bike. The regular kickstand is just to allow it to kind of lean over to the side, and this center stand allows you to prop the bike up perfectly vertically like this. It'll actually lift that rear tire off the ground. Very handy if you're doing your own maintenance when you're lubricating the chain or changing the rear tire. Very, very handy to have a center stand, although a lot of bikes don't come with these. It's actually a lot less common. But if you can get one, I would get one. If there's an option, get it. Definitely get it. You'd regret it later if you didn't get that. Although I'll say a lot of performance bikes, a lot of modern street bikes do not come with these. this little box right here, this can often sometimes be just part of the frame. They might jam some random electronics in there that have no other good place. They're kind of covering up and hiding them. Oftentimes you'll find the horn, other various different components in there. You don't really need to know what's here. There might be a fuse box in here. I've seen everything like that. There's all kinds of random parts. You might also find a fuse box hidden behind here somewhere too, or under the seat. They can be almost anywhere. You have to check your owner's manual for that. This is the front suspension right here. These are the forks. We call that the forks. All right, these are Gaiters. They call these right here Gaiters. Not a lot of bikes have these. It's kind of an old style thing. Basically the Gaiters, or dirt bike, okay, or dual sport bike, those have them a lot too. But the Gaiters are just covering up where the bottom part of the fork meets the top part of the fork, because they actually go inside each other. It's two pieces, more pieces internally, but two major pieces. One fits inside the other. At the interface of these forks, there's something called a fork seal. Those things are sensitive to damage, and so that's why these are protecting those, so that you don't produce leaks. If you leak, then oil comes out of them. So there's actually oil inside the fork. All right, front wheel, you have a front fender. Nothing crazy here. You've got your front brake. This big outer metal disc is called a rotor. Okay, this right here is called a brake disc, the caliper right there. We'll look at that on the other side of the bike because the view here kind of stinks. So I think we're about done with this side. We will move on to the next. Let's just get a little better look here in the back, where we can see this is where your license plate's going to go. It gets illuminated by the bottom of the brake light. You have your brake light and your turn signals here. Not much else going on, although you can take a quick look and just sort of see how things are a little bit different from this angle. Moving on to the right side here, the major difference we have, and actually let's go back, and I want to do that here. From here, this is actually the shift lever, which you're going to shift gears with using your left foot, okay? And that's a major difference, because if we go over here to the right side, this big lever right there is actually your rear brake, and you control that with your right foot. Okay, so this is where things get a lot different from a car, in that there's two different brakes on a motorcycle. Brake one is up here on the right side. The rear brake is down here on the right side as well with the foot lever. I should tell you right away, which one's more important? The front brake is more important. The rear brake is less important. Okay, still important, but just less important. We're just talking relative terms here. Why? Because the front brake is a lot more powerful than the rear brake. All right, so we're not going to go into the methods and techniques of braking, but just note the front brake is a lot more powerful than the rear brake, and the actual way that you brake, there's a lot of technique and a lot of finesse that comes into it with motorcycles that doesn't necessarily apply to cars, for example. Although things are getting a lot better in motorcycles, and that this bike in particular, let's just talk about that now, has ABS. The way that you can tell this bike has ABS is this inner ring. Now you see these little squares in here. Actually, let me zoom in here so you can really see that. Now you see those squares right there. That ring right there has these like little square radial disc. That right there, every bike with ABS has that, and there's a little sensor here, and actually can determine the wheel speed using these little sensors here. All right, let me zoom back out. So that outer metal disc, of course, is the rotor, as we said, and this is the brake caliper. The brake caliper is fed using oil that comes down, and that helps squeeze the brake caliper. The brake caliper then squeezes the brake rotor, and that slows you down. And the way that you're slowing down is that interface between the pavement and your tire. Okay, so you can only really slow down as good as your tires are. Your tires are actually kind of one of the biggest factors that determines how quick you can slow down. If your tires don't have grip, you can't slow down. Okay, so your brakes are converting kinetic energy into heat energy. But we don't need to get really complex with that, but just know that that's happening. All right, so up here, again, we'll talk about the controls in a second. I don't want to muddle that since this view is pretty bad. But this right here is probably just some feed for oil. This is probably pumping oil from the bottom of the bike up to the top. It keeps it nice and cool. What else do we have here? You can see your rear brake caliper in the back. Of course, this bike has two mufflers, two exhaust pipes. A lot of bikes only have one. This one has two. No big deal. Doesn't make a big difference. Probably just for weight, looks, a little bit of performance. Coming over to the front, just take a look at the headlight. We have one headlight here. You may have one or two bulbs. You may have one bulb that switches to a high beam. You may have a high beam bulb and a low beam bulb separate. This is why you probably think a lot of motorcycles have a headlight out. It's really because they have two separate bulbs. One is going to be for the low beam, one is going to be for the high beam. So the one for the high beam obviously is not on all the time, rather. Okay, just get a good look at this from here. You can see the mirrors, nice polished mirrors on this bike. If you're wondering, these little cutouts here, these things are somewhat for style, but these can also be used for grip. This is sort of where your knee is going to touch the gas tank. It protects the paint on the gas tank, adds a little bit of style, might even give you a little bit of grip. Okay, and it helps keep you planted on the motorcycle. Let's go to the next one. So this is what it's going to look like when you're sitting on the motorcycle. Biggest things to look at here are going to be that gas tank. Again, you can see where you put the key inside here. And just be careful, again, when you're turning that gas tank. Easiest thing you can do is bend your key because you just don't have it correct, or you need to kind of jiggle it a little bit. Seriously, bikes are a little bit finicky when it comes to gas tanks. Let's take a look at the controls, rather, on the left-hand side. This is the clutch lever. You're going to pull that in when you're shifting gears. All right, let me reset the drawing here because I need you to be able to see that. This is the high beam, low beam control, pretty standard. Almost every motorcycle has these controls on the left side. This is your turn signal control, and this is going to be your horn, okay? That's really what's on the left side. You buy an expensive bike, a Ducati, a BMW, KTM, something like that, you're going to find a lot more gadgets and doohickeys over here, okay? But the basics that's the basics. But as you add more features and more technology to a bike, you'll tend to control it over here. You need some way to control all that. That's going to be over on your left side. People don't like to put that on the right side because the right side is more sort of mission critical, if you will. This is the front brake. All right, this is the throttle. This is your gas pedal, if you want to call it gas pedal. This is a kill switch. This turns the engine on and off. Notice it's bright red. In case you had to panic, you had to shut the motor down. You don't know how, you just hit that either up or down. A lot of them work in both directions. You push it up, you push it down, it shuts the bike off. This is your electric start right there. This is a brake fluid reservoir. So that's for the front brake. This is filled with some kind of oil, brake fluid, which is a kind of oil. And it feeds all the way down. When you squeeze the lever, it goes all the way down and essentially feeds that front brake caliper, squeezes it for you. You have your handlebars, obviously, your grips. Grips are important. They keep your hands comfortable. All right, and then you have your gauge cluster, and we're going to zoom in on this. So let's do that now. You can see this looks really familiar to what's in a car. There's really no difference. A lot of newer, more modern, expensive bikes are going to have dashboards more similar to a modern car. You're going to see big flat screen LED panels, things like that, but the price is going to go way up on those kinds of bikes. That's going to be on your BMW or your KTM, maybe your latest and greatest Harley or something like that. Your key ignition here. The only major difference between a car and a bike is that the bike has a slot, and actually I can't even remember if a car does, but the bike almost always has a slot where you have sort of lock, which locks the steering column. You have like accessory power on, parking lights on, and then you have like full on, so you can start the motor. Now the weird thing is, when you put it in lock mode, you turn it all the way, you can actually remove the key, and that locks the steering wheel. See, the steering wheel is pointed like this. It prevents it from rotating. This is supposed to be an anti-theft thing, but you know, someone can break that pretty easily, but you should probably get in the habit of using it anyway. The other thing to worry about is there's sort of an accessory parking light position. I'm not saying, I think it's one of these. There's like an accessory parking light position, and there's a full on. You can also remove the key from during that position. This will leave the lights on and leave power applied to your bike. This can damage it. It'll kill your battery, best case scenario. Worst case scenario, you can actually fry your different parts inside the ignition system, so just don't do it. Always make sure it's actually off, there's no lights still running, and that it's just totally off before you pull the key out. Or if you put it in that lock position, it's usually safe to put in there too. You don't get any power during that position. Other than that, you can see all these lights, same ones you're going to see in a car, trip meter, just like on a car. You may or may not have a gas gauge. That's probably the biggest shocker, is that if you buy a motorcycle these days, still many of them, if not most of them, do not have a fuel gauge on them. They're not going to tell you how much fuel is left in them, so you're going to have to rely on either a trip meter to estimate how much fuel you're going to get, or like me, you just fuel up every single time you get on the bike, and just, I don't know, every 100 miles or so. Some bikes can go 300 miles on a tank of gas. Some of them can barely do 100 miles on a tank of gas. So that's something to keep in mind. You may not think about it when you're purchasing a bike or looking at bikes, but it is an issue. Fuel gauge. Fuel gauges are a great luxury if you have one on a motorcycle. And of course, if you're wondering, what are these big, huge bolts on here? These just actually go on top of the forks. You can service the forks by opening these up. So this is not something you really need to touch normally. And that's about it. So we're going to end it here for the quick overview. Hopefully that has you feeling like, oh, I kind of know what this stuff is now. I kind of have an idea of what these things do. We're going to go into more depth in future videos, of course, but I think that's about it. I don't want to go too nuts on the first one here. All right. And with that, we will end this video. Please take a look at the entire playlist if you'd like to learn more. The best way to stay informed and find out when I release a new video is by subscribing and hitting the bell for notifications. If you liked the video, consider giving me a thumbs up. I really appreciate that feedback and support. Do you have a specific question or request? Let me know about it in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer it. And who knows, maybe I'll make a video on it if enough people have, some interest in it. Anyway, take care. This is Dr. Will for Rider Forge.